Hello and welcome to Platzforma podcast, a virtual space where we discuss ideas, culture and politics from a broader leftist perspective. My name is Vitalijs Pranciane and I will be the host of this episode. On May 18th this year, Poland held the first round of presidential elections. A total of 13 candidates were present on the ballot. The elections were conducted in a highly polarized environment, and the topics of migration, Europe, security were central to the debates in the country, along with other topics such as social policies, economic policies. The campaign was also accompanied by scandals of corruption, connections of certain candidates with the criminal underworld, hypocrisy, etc. Two candidates that collected most of the votes are Rafał Trzaskowski, the Mayor of Warsaw, with 31% of the votes, and the conservative Karol Nawrocki, with 29% of the votes. Trzaskowski was supported by the current government of Donald Tusk and the Civic Coalition political party, in Polish Koalicja Obywatelska, while Nawrocki got the support of the PiS, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, in English Law and Justice Party, and the incumbent President Duda. To many observers and commentators, the results of these elections represent yet another example of one of the biggest problems of the Polish political system, the so-called duopoly, which means the dominance for more than 20 years of the Polish political sphere by two big parties, the Civic Coalition and the Law and Justice parties. They are somehow managing not only to attract most of the votes, but also to maintain and keep, over 2 decades already, a stable core of voters who ensure their predominance in Polish politics. To other observers, while this general picture is true overall, it also hides the fact that the elections also gave prominence to several other smaller political forces, both from the right and from the left. I sat down with 3 comrades that live and work in Poland to comment on the results of the first round of the presidential elections. Agnieszka Wiśniewska is a former editor-in-chief of Krytyka Polityczna. She is an activist, feminist, journalist and political commentator. Klaudia Ciobanu is a Polish correspondent for the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. Teodor Ażder is editor and contributor for the migrant journal Mama-Liga de Warszawia, Mama-Liga Warszawska. Earlier during the campaign, Karol Nawrocki, the candidate of PiS, had declared that Poland's presidential election on 18th of May will be a referendum on rejecting Tusk's government policies. I asked Klaudia Ciobanu to comment on the policies of Donald Tusk and his government and the way in which Tusk's government policies are impacting the current elections.
The victory of the Tusk government is fresh in everybody's minds. It was just in late 2023 when it happened. So performance of Trzaskowski today is much weaker than the performance of the Tusk camp during parliamentary elections like 1.5 years ago. Why that's the case? That's the case because back then that was not so much a victory of PO over PiS as much as it was like a massive mobilization of people who didn't want peace, that before didn't used to vote, but that just mobilized to come to vote. So basically participation in the elections was much higher than usually, just because women and youth that hadn't voted before, they just came out to the polls. So this brought PO above its usual core electorate. When it comes to the core electorates of the parties, these guys, these two camps are really ironclad. They have very similar support, around 30%. So the loss by PiS in 2023, it was not actually because it lost its core voters. It was because a lot of the people that maybe were not voting before just mobilized massively to get rid of PiS. And those same people, I think they are kind of disappointed with what the Tusk government has achieved. Nobody's definitely enthusiastic about this government. Maybe in the beginning, some of the core voters of PO were a little bit excited because there were a couple of parliamentary commissions set up to investigate abuse of power by PiS, which was very real and needs to be investigated, of course. But I think PO spent quite a lot of time on putting on this those show commissions that in the end, they started with a fanfare, but in the end didn't necessarily finish with, evidence for the prosecutors or things like that. Some attempts to repair things in the justice system, but again, you cannot complete these reforms without having a president, because a peace-friendly president is always going to vote against, is going to veto reverting the peace justice reforms. So basically, what Tusk did do so far is this retribution agenda, implementing the retribution agenda, not completely, but, they definitely making a big deal out of it. And, he's been quite good at European politics. He has always been good at that. And he has, made sure that Poland is a key player on Ukraine. And he's sitting there with the German Chancellor Merz, and they are talking big European affairs. So that's what the Tusk government has done so far. But what it hasn't done, it hasn't legalized abortion as it has promised to do. And women know that they don't do that just because of Duda being there blocking matters. They don't do that because inside their own coalition and inside Tusk's party, there are enough conservatives that they just cannot even push this through the parliament, even if they have a majority. They're not doing anything about climate change, and kids, the youth, are out in the street blocking highways, demanding climate action, directly addressing Trzaskowski as a mayor of Warsaw, and they're getting arrested and convicted for doing that. So the youth are not particularly impressed either. But I think this government also hasn't done much in terms of inspiring. But I think this government hasn't done also anything when it comes to the socio-economic situation to just bring a vision to people. The only vision that Tusk has really presented is making deals with these tech corporations. It has received pretty much presidents of all of them in Warsaw, promised, whatever good conditions for investment in exchange for, I don't know what kind of promises from the likes of Microsoft and Google that they will bring future benefits to the Polish economy. The other thing he has promised to do is deregulate the Polish economy. Back in February, Tusk nominated very informally at the Warsaw Stock Exchange one of Poland's billionaires, Rafał Trzaskowski, kind of create a non-parliamentary commission, so a commission, made up of business people, economists, to propose measures to deregulate the Polish economy. There's very little follow-up on the work of this commission, but experts I've interviewed, independent experts, economists, or from the trade unions, they say that a core of the measures go in the direction of basically weakening the position of tax authorities and state authorities in relation to businesses, leaving more room potentially for tax abuse. And this is going on completely without any public scrutiny. The proposals go directly to Tusk's office, and then they go to the parliament as governmental proposals, completely going around a more inclusive process of coming up with legislative proposals. They don't even have to gather the 100,000 signatures that any kind of citizen initiative has to raise to get into the parliament. So it's very much a pro-business government, and not doing much otherwise for people, but also not really presenting much substance, I think, when it comes to socioeconomic issues, one way or another. So we got a pretty uninspirational government, I think, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. Most of the first year was spent on retribution or almost retribution against the illiberals, or failed attempts at retribution. And then most of the other energy is spent on defense, which is important. It's hard to say that it's not important. On the Russian threat, and also on immigration, where Tusk has gone much, much further to the right than peace. This government suspended the right to asylum on the Polish-Belarusian border by executive decree, and it has very recently prolonged this suspension in the Polish parliament. So this is probably going to continue without end. A suspension of the right to asylum on the Polish-Belarusian border. This is the first country in the European Union to do that, and the Commission is fine. They've kind of given their green light to it. But it's a very negative content made up of fears and threats. The threat of war, the threat of immigration, the Russian threat, the threat of peace coming back, the threat of illiberalism. And there's very little positive content that this government is giving to people on issues that they really care about, on housing that is extremely expensive and completely unaffordable, on people not with the minimum wage but with the medium wage, on increasing prices that are affecting Poles as well as others in the same way as they affect other Europeans, on health, education, right, always chronic problems in this part of the world, on climate, despite the youth going out to the streets, never mind having any kind of like progressive or original or interesting positions on some major international crisis, like what's happening in Palestine today, where actually the opinion of Poles is much more progressive than what we might imagine. So I think it's just hard for people to feel inspired to vote for Rafał Trzaskowski, who is also not a fresh politician and definitely carries the burden of being the representative of the Tusk camp, who are the liberals that many people wanted back in power, but they are not really bringing something inspiring, and they fought the electoral campaign very much on the hard right turf. So no wonder that the far right performed better than expected, and that more than 50% of Poles voted for a different shade of ultranationalists.
I asked Agnieszka Wiśniewska to present what are, in her opinion, the 2-3 main conclusions of the first round of the presidential elections, and what were the main topics of the first round.
The results of the first round of presidential elections showed us few important things. 3 are extremely important from my perspective. First, we could see that the right-wing politics is very strong in Poland. The second is that left is not dead yet. And the third is that duopoly, this strong appearance on the Polish political scene of Law and Justice, right-wing Law and Justice, and liberals from Civic Platform, they occupied the political scene for the last 20 years, and they are still strong. Not so strong, not as strong as there was, but still they are strong. In presidential election, we had a very high turnout this year in the first round. It was 67%. And the biggest turnout we had in parliamentary election in 2023, it was 74%, and it was like the miracle in Poland. But still, 67%, it's a lot. And usually the second round is much more popular because in the second round we know that now we decide who will gonna be the president of Poland. So it means that there are lots of people who are interested in politics and who cares and who really wanted to vote. They had lots of choices. The first 2 places was taken by the candidate from Civic Platform, Rafał Trzaskowski, and Karol Nawrocki, the candidate supported by Law and Justice. And these 2 political parties occupied Polish political scene till 2000. They started in 2005. There was the first parliamentary election in 2005, where these parties, they had Law and Justice 27%, Civic Platform 24%. It means they started to be very big and strong. And till that time, it means for 20 years, they are the most important political actors on Polish political scene. So it's not a coincidence, and we can see this last 20 years, that in the second round we always have the candidate one is from Civic Platform and the other is from Law and Justice. And the same we're gonna have this year. The main topics during this presidential campaign in Poland was, of course, security. which is one of the main topics in all Europe right now. But also security connected with the migrants politics. This is the typical connection for the conservatives and right-wingers, which try to convince us that if there will be more migrants in our countries, then those countries will be less safe. It's not like that. It depends how the country works on the policies, like the migrant policies. If they just build this thinking of fear, of course it builds like the walls between like the people who are here, who live here for years, and the newcomers, like the migrants. So I think migration, or like especially migration from Ukraine, that was the topic.
In Teodor Azder's view, much of the competition between the two main political forces took place in terms of policies and rhetoric on the right wing of the political spectrum, a point also mentioned by Claudia. According to Teodor, both main parties, PiS and the Civic Platform, are engaged in a contest on who is pleasing more the voters on the right. Teodor argues that, for example, in terms of migration policies, the so-called liberal Civic Coalition proved to be more to the right, more xenophobic even than PiS, especially when it passed a series of anti-immigrant laws, among which the most outrageous was the law on the suspension of asylum procedures. Also, both parties and their candidates are very much nationalistic and are, in Teodor's words, populistic, in the sense that they pretend not to do politics. Let's listen to Teodor Azder.
Personally, I don't see actually a big difference between the two bigger parties. There's enough liberalism in PiS to profit from the EU funds and participate in European Union elections, and send its Eurodeputies to Brussels, where they are well fed and where they receive good salaries and participate in the running of Europe. The 500 plus, now 800 plus social policy per child till 18 years old, which probably keeps them in power and helps them to go on, although it did not solve the birth decline rate in Poland, did solve the issue of acute poverty among children and boosted the local economies. On the other hand, Koalicja Obywatelska is so radically conservative that as soon as they replaced PiS after the last parliamentary elections, they changed their rhetoric, becoming more anti-immigrant than PiS, and passed a series of xenophobic and anti-immigrant laws, of which the most outrageous is the suspension of asylum procedures. They keep pushing for this agenda. Just a few days ago, the country's Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, along other European Union leaders, just after the first tour of presidential elections, co-signed yet another xenophobic initiative, which is a letter spearheaded by the Italian Giorgia Meloni and Denmark's Mette Frederiksen, that pushes for an ending of irregular immigration in the European Union and for the reinterpretation of the European Convention of Human Rights, whose tight constraints prevent European governments from expelling foreign nationals from with criminal records. No matter if the Human Rights Convention has been one of the cornerstones protecting fundamental freedoms in Europe for over 70 years. The Polish liberals are quite liberal when it comes to migrants. In other words, Koalicja Obywatelska seems to be as Eurosceptic as PiS was during the presidential campaign. On the other hand, the context is such that Europe itself is becoming anti-European, in my opinion. The contenders of both parties prefer to pose with national flags in the background. The only time a rainbow flag appeared in the campaign was during the Polish presidential debate on April 11, 2025, when Karol Nawrocki a historian and the director of the Institute of National Memory, the candidate supported by the Law and Justice Peace Party. By the way, he is being advertised as the candidate of the people, of the citizens. So it's kind of, even the word is the same that they're using in this campaign. Koalicja Obywatelska and the candidate Obywatelski. He placed a rainbow flag on the lectern of his opponent Rafał Trzaskowski, an educated political and European scientist, and also the current mayor of Warsaw. This act was pointed criticism of Trzaskowski's previous support for LGBTQ rights, but Trzaskowski, even though mocked by the riot as the Rainbow Rafał, responded by removing the flag, calling it an obsession of the gay people. During the same debate, Magdalena Beat of the New Left, also a candidate in the presidential first tour, approached Trzaskowski, took the flag from under the table and placed it on her own lectern, stating that she is not ashamed of it, which is a good win for her, I guess. Trzaskowski was initially critical about the pushbacks, especially when PiS was governing and were responsible for them. He became less critical, though, when KO took over the government in what was promised to be a central leftist coalition group. However, the new government perpetuated the xenophobic legislation and added some more hate laws to the bunch imposed earlier by PiS, as I mentioned already. Similarly, both winners of the first tour seemed to declare in a populist vein that politics is not what they are very much into. Nawrocki said, for example, that he is new in politics and he is just practicing it for a couple of months, while Trzaskowski tries to distance himself from political sphere in an attempt to be liked by and please everybody.
According to Agnieszka Wisniewska, the way the votes of the young voters were distributed shows that there is an attempt from the youth to overcome the duopoly of the political system.
What was very interesting is how the youngest voters voted. The youngest, the group, the cohort, 18 years to 29 years. And if those group could choose the candidate for the second round, in the second round we could have like Sławomir Mencen from Konfederacja, radical right wing, and Adrian Zandberg from Razem, radical left wing. It means the young voters voted like completely different than the older generation. It means that young voters, they choose the politicians who are not from this duopoly which occupied Polish political scene for 20 years. I'm 43. It means like for almost all of my grown-up life, I see on the political scene almost the same faces from two biggest political parties. And the youngest voters, they decided they don't want to vote on this, on the representatives of these two political parties. They didn't vote for the Trzaskowski or Nawrocki. They decided to vote on Mencen and Adrian Zandberg. And this is not new, but on the other hand, it's a bit new. Not new, it means that very often in the election we can see the difference between younger voters' decisions and older voters' decisions. And the younger voters are usually much more radical, but then they grow up and they change their mind. So it's not surprised that this time also younger voters choose the much more radical politicians like Mencen and Zandberg. But on the other hand, these are not the politicians who are like marginalized. Like so Sławomir Mencen probably will gonna stay on this political scene, and Adrian Zandberg the same. So it's such a big group of young voters that maybe some of them they will change their mind in the future, but some of them they can stay with right-wing, radical right-wing Konfederacja or with radical left-wing Razem.
Along similar lines, Theodor Ajder argues that the youth are casting, in these elections, a protest vote aimed to punish both parties, but mostly Koalicja Obywatelska, for not keeping their promises from the 2023 parliamentary elections on the legalization of abortion, on the accessibility of housing, and on other issues.
Youth don't really vote in national elections worldwide, or at least not in such a massive way. Poland is one of the few outliers in this sense. And I think that, generally speaking, the voting presence was very, very high in Poland, so close to 70%. I think the Polish youth are so involved because, firstly, Poland is quickly turning right in front of their eyes into a very, very attractive place to live in. Their vote was definitely a protest vote, and Manson's voters are a fairly mixed group and not necessarily committed to a Nazi ideology, as some pinpointed. They might be anti-immigrant, and they don't want to pay high taxes for health because they don't get sick. They don't want to have children, and that's why abortion, or access to abortion, is important for them, which is something that the right politicians can't really understand. And they don't want the government to pay these 800 plus because they don't have kids and they don't want to have them. But they want free access to abortion, and they want more rights, and they want more autonomy when it comes to running their businesses. Secondly, young voters are very much dissatisfied because their postulates and needs are not being satisfied. Their vote in 2023 parliamentary elections that dethroned peace was ignored by the new Tusk coalition government. For example, abortion was not tackled. The state taxes and the communication with the tax office is still quite problematic, especially for the small entrepreneurs. The housing is getting progressively more expensive, especially in bigger cities. In fact, it is quite beyond imagination. In the first round of presidentials, they casted again a protest vote, in my opinion, only that now it is more radical. If we are to look only at the votes of the youth, then Madsen and interestingly Zandberg from Razem would have been the contenders in the second tour. In 2023, the youth realized that their vote counts and it can change the world of politics. It emancipated them. Some analysts believe that this is why they came again to vote in such great numbers. They want to change the way things work. And they know that they have the means.
I asked both Agnieszka Wisniewska and Theodor Ajder if, in this context, they could envision some space for left politics in Poland.
Left-wing, this year we had 3 candidates from the left-wing political parties or the movements, and 2 of them, they had quite good results, we can say. Like, if we think about the left wing is not very strong, but both candidates, Adrian Zandberg from Razem, it's left wing which is anti-governmental, they are not a part of the government. He took 4.8%, and Magdalena Biejat from Nowa Lewica, New Left Wing. New Left Wing is a part of the government. She took 4.2%. It means together they had and with the third candidate, they had almost 10%, which is quite good. It means that, there are still left-wing voters, and still there is a possibility to propose social democratic left-wing programs in Poland, on Polish political scene.
Though, to tell you the truth, I was considering boycotting the second tour of casting my vote in the first tour for Adrian Zandberg, the candidate of Razem Party, which translates in English as Together. This is a fairly new grassroots left party that evolved independently with no connection with the former Communist Party. He had close to 5% in the first round, which marked the first time when a candidate from a left-wing party, non-affiliated to the All Communist Party, had such a high score in a presidential election. If we add to this Magdalena Beyet's over 4% from the New Left, the whole 10% seem to be pretty good, I guess. Razem was initially part of the coalition following the 2023 Polish parliamentary elections, known as the 15 October coalition, that brought down peace. However, the party later decided to step down due to the disagreements over policy commitments. It did not join the government as such, but it agreed to support Tusk's government in votes of confidence. Razum's decision to remain outside of the government stemmed from the coalition's refusal to include key policy demands in the agreement: the decriminalization of abortion, increased spending on healthcare, housing, and migration issues. In October 2024, Razum held a non-binding consultative referendum among its members, resulting in a decision to leave the coalition, which they did. But prior to the official exit, Magdalena Beyat, a co-leader of Razum, actually, along with other 26 members, including 5 Sejm or Polish Parliament MPs, announced their departure from the party and joined the government as the New Left group. Beyat also participated in the elections and also scored an important record. Placed just below Zandberg's score, Beyat marked the highest score ever accumulated by a female candidate in the Polish presidential election. And this is quite interesting because, keep in mind, New Left had no support of a big established party.
Teodor Așder also mentioned a certain Romanian and Moldovan connection with the elections in Poland. Both candidates with the most votes in the first round got explicit political support from the candidates that won most votes in the Romanian presidential elections, Nicu Șordan and George Simion. The president of Moldova, Maia Sandu, also featured, although indirectly, in the Polish presidential elections. This is to prove, in my opinion, that elections are not, and they probably have never been, just a national affair. We're increasingly seeing, both on the right and on the left, international participation in local and national elections. Local politics is global politics, and the other way around.
This time, the Polish presidential elections had a Romanian twist as well, probably also because the campaigns unfolded in more or less the same period of time, but also to prove that, in a way, European Union works for everybody, be it conservative or neoliberal. Both Polish candidates, first tour winners, got support from the 2 second tour candidates to Romanian presidency. George Simion came to Poland first and participated in one of the Nawrocki's, the peace-supported candidate campaign rallies just before the Romanian elections, while the elected president of Romania, Nicu Șordan, made his first official international visit as a president to Poland and participated in a big Trzaskowski march of support this past Sunday in Warsaw's downtown. Maia Sandu, again, no pun intended, also appeared in the Polish media after the first tour, as she was awarded a special mention at the Man of the Year ceremony organized by Gazeta Wyborcza, which is the biggest national daily, and a very strong supporter of KO candidate Trzaskowski. The actual prize was offered to the historian Norman Davis. But Sandu was kind of dragged into the campaign. It seems she's more cautious this time. There was a big interview with her, and there was a big article about Moldova in Wyborcza. Probably also part of the fact that there are some funds dedicated to strengthening the ties between Poland and Moldova, but also probably Wyborcza wanted to show that they're very much interested in the eastern part, the eastern territories, and this is again one of the differences between Trzaskowski and and Nawrocki. Trzaskowski is more eager probably to help and is actively interested in what is happening in Ukraine, unlike Nawrocki, even though Trzaskowski also had a few anti-Ukrainian remarks in his speeches. But even though Sandra's party PAS is in a very close relationship with Koalicja Obywatelska, let us not forget that the peace-supported incumbent President Andrzej Duda visited Moldova, and Nawrocki still might win. After all, if one would assume that the numbers of right-wing voters will add and the trend from the first tour will continue in the second one.
20 years ago, in May 2005, France held a referendum on the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe. One of the biggest bogeymen of that referendum was the figure of the Polish plumber, a stereotype with racist connotations that encapsulated the fear of the West in general, and the French in particular, of cheap labor coming from Eastern Europe and threatening the jobs of Western European workers. The stereotype, popularized by the nationalist and conservative French politician Philippe de Villiers, contributed to the rejection of the Constitution for Europe by the French voters. Rejected by the so-called civilized Europe, Poland turned to the right, to the extent to which, as we have seen, both main political parties are on the right, and they are moving further away to the right. If there was a lesson for the Poles to be learned from the French, it was probably that the so-called European solidarity is a myth, a fact that was proven later to be right on the occasion of the economic crisis in Greece, and that nationalism, xenophobia, anti-immigrant rhetoric have been normalized again. But there is, as the guests of my podcast have shown, a hope, a small one for now, but it might grow into something bigger someday. This was the Platzforma podcast. Thank you for listening. If you can afford, please consider the option of supporting us on Patreon. In any case, please like and share our content.